Hello, and welcome to this virtual screening of LFG. My name is Claudia Luna. I'm the Assistant General Manager of the LA Civil Rights Department. It is my honor to welcome you to this Women's History Month event. Before we begin, there are a few organizations and people I would like to recognize. The Los Angeles Commission on the Status of Women and their chair, Jackie Filla, as well as Commissioner Marla. The Los Angeles Human Relations Commission and Commissioner Angelica Solis-Montero, the LA84 Foundation, and President and CEO Renata Simril, LA28 CEO Kathy Carter, Mayor Eric Garcetti, who is co-sponsoring tonight's event, and finally, Picture Motion, which made today's screening possible. LFG, directed by Andrea Nix Fine and Sean Fine, tells the true story of U.S. women's soccer and their historic fight for pay equity. Despite becoming World Cup champions in 2019, U.S. women's soccer received less pay than the men's soccer team, which hasn't won a World Cup since 1994. The issue is familiar to many women across the world. In 2020, women in the United States were paid 84 cents for every dollar a man was paid, and the pay gap is even wider for women of color. Black women only earn 63 cents for every dollar a white man earns, and for Latinas, it's only 57 cents. The historic fight led by U.S. women's soccer inspired the world, as women followed their efforts from the soccer field to the courtroom. Recently, we've seen some positive news, which Commissioner Marla will share with you later, but this is real progress. And it's made possible by the players and fans who refuse to back down and settle for anything less. Only when women and our allies speak up and speak out do we see change happen. I hope this film leaves you feeling inspired and motivated to make change in your community and build a Los Angeles where women and girls thrive. After a short speaking program, we're all going to move from this Zoom to the virtual screening room. LA Civil Rights will share the link in that chat. But now it is my distinct honor to welcome the President of the Commission on the Status of Women, Commissioner Jackie Filla.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our virtual screening. The Commission on the Status of Women is a commission in the city of Los Angeles that was established by Mayor Tom Bradley in 1965 with the mission to advocate for the general welfare of women and girls in the Los Angeles community, and to ensure that all women have full and equal participation in city government. So not a small charge there. We're really excited to welcome you to this particular event because this is our first event that the Commission on the Status of Women got to host and come together following the centennial of women's suffrage. And we find ourselves sort of at a precipice, and with this film being able to explore some really important issues facing women and girls, not just in Los Angeles, but we know globally. And so as we think about the 100-year march of women being able to vote, that we get to sort of take a step back this evening and explore pay equity and that intersection with these really important conversations that have been discussed and played out in one of the favorite halls and pastimes of just people in general, and that is in fact sports. And thinking back to the passage of Title IX and the inclusion of sports as really a way for women to gain scholarships in higher education, as a way for women to be able to participate in some of those skill building, team building, leadership building activities that, when you look to things like Supreme Court nominees and CEOs, they all cite playing on some sort of team. And in the city of Los Angeles in particular, our Rec and Park Department has really made many strides in making sure that there's play equity for girls and boys, whether that comes to how we think about our offerings, but even thinking about who's coaching our youth and who those referees are and what genders are represented. And this is a particularly important time because as we know, the pandemic is really, the data is showing us is really sort of a she-session, not just a recession for everyone. And as we think about the growth of the economy and how things are moving, we know that our economy in the United States alone is still missing 4 million women from the workforce. And we fear that a lot of this will become permanent. So while we think about these challenges, it does, as government and interested parties, it really gives us the opportunity to examine and sort of reset on these deep-seated inequities, as our Assistant General Manager, Claudia Luna, mentioned, that existed and were exacerbated by the pandemic. And so sports gives us the frame to do that. As she also mentioned, we have a lot of young athletes on the call, and I'll take some privilege here to give a shout out to the soccer team at Mount St. Mary's University, the Women's College. And really what's on their minds is sort of this idea of how you approach pay equity in terms of how women make something that we consider equal, when typically we compare men to women in a field where all of the employees are female. How do we get these baselines for pay equity? And how do you make comparisons? And can we make the leap to those comparisons in male sports? And then the other real question on a lot of these young athletes' minds are, in future, thinking about careers, is sports a viable career path for female athletes? And so what they're really interested in is, can they pursue their passions, their interests, their talents in sports as a life-sustaining activity that can support a family? Is that something that we see being available to our female athletes in a way that really inspires them to pursue sports, not just for the recreation, the exercise, the leadership, but as a real profession? And while I'm no expert in that, what we were able to assemble is probably, I actually cannot imagine a better panel than we've been able to recruit this evening. And so I get the real distinct honor of getting to introduce a colleague who I feel really honored to get to serve the city of Los Angeles with. And that is Commissioner Marla Messing, who is currently the interim CEO of the National Women's Soccer League. And prior to that, was the CEO of the United States Tennis Association. So to say that Marla knows a thing or two about women in sports is probably the understatement of the centennial that we're so excited to celebrate. So with that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Messing. But thank you all for attending. We're very excited to have you.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Filla. That was very nice of you. It is an exciting time to be a female athlete, and this is in no small part due to the work of the women on the U.S. women's soccer team. As you will see in the film, these women bravely raised their voices in the interest of equal pay and equal treatment for elite athletes who compete for the United States of America. Heading into the 2019 FIFA Women's World Cup, the U.S. women's soccer team astutely used this quadrennial platform to launch their legal battle for gender equity and quickly caught the attention of soccer fans around the world. Just weeks ago, nearly 3 years later, these women and the U.S. Soccer Federation settled the lawsuit for $24 million in back pay to some 60 female soccer players. This is both a monumental victory for female athletes and a relatively narrow victory. While it is clear that national governing bodies of sport may not differentiate compensation and investment between male and female athletes, this will impact a relatively small number of elite female athletes. The next frontier for women's sports, as Commissioner Filla alluded to, the next frontier for women's sports is the professional realm. And here, US law will be hard pressed to help. That's why it is incumbent on all of us to support professional female athletes by buying tickets to their games or tour events, jerseys and jackets with their names on them, products of their sponsors, and in today's world, subscription packages to stream their games and contests. The business of professional women's sports is still in its infancy. By supporting businesses like the WNBA, National Women's Soccer League, Women's Tennis or Beach Volleyball Tour, and a host of others, we can help tens of thousands of professional female athletes to make a living doing what they love. Now it is my pleasure to introduce one of the preeminent sports executives in the country, Kathy Carter, the CEO of the 2028 Olympic and Paralympic Games.
Why don't I start by unmuting myself? You would think by now in the Zoom environment, we'd all know to hit that button, but thank you, Marla, and thank you all for having me. Nice to see friendly faces on the Zoom boxes, and appreciate all of the work putting together this great event. Let me pick up on a couple things that were discussed, and just in general as we think about what the future holds for all of us, both as women, be that as athletes or as business executives. And I'm sure Renata will talk a little bit about this as well. You mentioned it was 100 years since women in the United States got the right to vote. And this year obviously marks the 50th anniversary of Title IX. And I was a beneficiary of Title IX as a young athlete. I never knew the opportunity not to play. It was always something that was a foregone conclusion, but reality is the fight continued for many, many years. Now, as a young person, I never ever thought that there could have been a time where I was not granted the right to vote. And my hope is that young women today never actually have to see the fight that we went through in the mid 70s and into the 80s to actually make it that it was a foregone conclusion that young girls and women would have an opportunity to play. I think that fight now continues on as we venture into boardrooms and into conference rooms as executives, and ultimately as we start to think about how and what we do to even the playing field. Let us look forward to a day where that is not an issue, where we think about women and representation in business. I will tell you that as we think about what the journey that is ahead of us to 2028, that's a part of what actually we think about in hosting the Olympic and Paralympic Games here in Los Angeles, is actually to showcase the opportunity for girls and women, both as athletes, but also as executives, to represent either their community, their sport, or their colleagues, whether that be on the field of play or in the boardroom, and really take an opportunity to showcase not just the opportunity for diversity and inclusion, but actually it will be because of women, people of color, and ultimately even our disabled athletes, that showcase that the art of possible is within everyone's grasp. So it was only on the shoulders of the sisters that come before us that any of us can do the things that we have an aspiration to do in the future. So I thank you all for allowing me to join you this evening. Thank you for the invitation, and I will kick it back to you, but stay tuned, and let's keep on pressing forward for the next generation.
Thank you, Kathy. We are so lucky to have you leading LA28. Very excited for things to come. And with that said, I want to introduce our Commissioner on the Human Relations Commission, our past president, Commissioner Angelica Solis-Montero.
Thank you so much, Claudia. Thank you to Director Capri Maddox of the department, Commissioners Jackie Filla and Marla Messing with the LA Commission on the Status of Women, LA84 Foundation President Renata Simril for your support of this event, and of course the Office of Mayor Eric Garcetti for championing the issues facing women and girls throughout Los Angeles. It's really an honor to be here with so many esteemed champions of justice and equity representing the city's Human Relations Commission. I want to lift up some issues that have impacted women, specifically during COVID. This Women's History Month is an important one because as we try to recover from the pandemic, we're really seeing the unequal toll taken on women. During the COVID-19 pandemic, women were pushed out of the workforce at higher rates than men, as you heard earlier. And this was particularly true for women of color. We lost 1 million more jobs than men during the COVID-19 crisis. And the industries that were most affected were held by women. Latinas were more likely than any other group to drop out of the workforce during the pandemic, according to UCLA. And in December of 2020, every single one of the 140,000 jobs lost in the United States had been held by a Black woman or Latina woman, according to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. So this is not an issue unique to COVID. As we know, COVID exposed a lot of the deep inequities in our society across race, gender, and income. So now we stand with a clear understanding of just how unequal our world is for women and for marginalized communities. And the only question is, what are we going to do about it? And at the LA City Human Relations Commission, we work with the LA Civil Rights Department to build community empowerment, foster more opportunities for our youth, and foster solidarity across communities. And this work not only leads to a more peaceful city, but a more just city. And when affected communities are brought to the table, we can envision an LA for all. And so speaking of, I want to ask you to join the LA Civil Rights for All campaign at our website, which is civilandhumanrights.lacity.org. And of course, we cannot do this work alone. So if you want to get involved in building a new normal that heals not just from COVID, but from the inequities of the old normal, please do join us. One of our great partners in empowering young women and men across Los Angeles is the LA84 Foundation, which has raised millions of dollars for youth sports opportunities. And so it is now my great honor to introduce President and CEO of the LA84, Renata Simril. Welcome, Renata.
Thank you, Angelica. And to Claudia, Marla, Jackie, to Mayor Eric Garcetti, and certainly my dear friend, Capri Maddox, thank you for screening this movie and bringing light to the power of courageous and fearless women. I thought to share a story about the impact that we don't always see when women find their voice and aren't afraid. I think, Marla, you used the word courageous. Certainly these women were courageous and risked their career to speak out on what they felt was right. So about 3 years ago, I received a call from a colleague of mine, a very good friend of mine, and said, I want to introduce you to a friend of mine by the name of Julie Ehrman. She wants to have a conversation with you about the community and gender equity in girls' sports. And I said, somebody wants to talk about, girls in sports and the transformative power of sport, I'm all ears. So we set up a meeting and Julie walks in. I'd never met her. We exchanged some emails and there was a woman that walked behind her. I happen to be a Star Wars fan, so I knew immediately who this woman was. It was Natalie Portman. I said to myself, please don't call her Princess Amidala. She had on some jeans and some Jordans in a t-shirt, and they both walked in and they sat down. And they shared with me in confidence at that time the fact that they were looking to bring a women's soccer club, a professional soccer team to Los Angeles. And, I'd followed Natalie Portman's career and I said, it's really odd because are you a sports fan? And she says, nope, I don't know the first thing about sports. But she was inspired by being invited to one of the games that the women played in about their fight for gender equity. And as she started to engage conversations with some players, former and current, and seeing the inspiration that these women provided to their fans and to the community, the conversation came up of what could she do to help to advance the cause. So she called some of her celebrities and there was a lot of influencers that really leaned in to help these courageous women in their fight for pay equity. And that resulted in the formation of Angel City Football Club. So this screening, these conversations are so vitally important because we don't know who is going to be inspired to get involved in the work that we do to advance gender equity and to advance pay equity. So just a personal thank you for each and every one of you for leaning in and for your courageous leadership as we continue to move forward the 50 years of Title IX for the next frontier of gender equity and pay equity. We do that every day with the LA84 Foundation as we provide direct service grant, coaching, education, infrastructure, research and convening around some of the most prevalent issues to ensure that all kids, regardless of where they come from, what they look like, their ability, have the opportunity to experience what we call as a transformative power of sport. And for us, that's not just about becoming a college athlete, a professional athlete, or an Olympic athlete, but it's really the life skills that one is able to develop through sport, the courage, the voice, the tribe that you're able to find through competitive sport. I know for myself, I personally would not be sitting here if it wasn't for sports. In my county rec and parks, in my city rec and parks, Del Amo Park was my park that Del Amo and Victoria that, really helped me as an awkward middle school young girl find my voice, find my courage, and find a path to transcend my circumstances. And that's what we do at the LA84 Foundation. We are so encouraged by the work that LA28 is doing in paying that legacy forward before the games even hit Los Angeles with an unprecedented investment in our city parks. We are encouraged to be able to work in partnership with Mayor Garcetti and Amy Wakeland, the first partner of the city of Los Angeles and Girls Play LA. And I think that I would just encourage each and every one of those watching this film this evening to pay attention to what you can do, large and small, to continue to advance our fight for gender equity and for pay equity. Even if it's just simply inspiring, as we do through the work that we engage with community-based organizations across Southern California, to make sure that we're supporting equality of access, play equity, gender equity, to ensure that no one
I think Renata may have frozen.
is left.
There you go.
There you go. I was closing and to say just thank you again for the opportunity to share a little bit about our work. We certainly see us as part of a collective team of moving forward our work for gender equity over the next 50 years.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the amazing panelists that we got to hear from today. We've now got a laundry list of things that we can do to make sure we're supporting our female athletes. We can support Girls Play LA, which is our city initiative to make sure that we're closing gender gaps and creating unique and interesting programs to engage children of all genders in all of the offerings that the city has concerning sport and other activities. You can take up Commissioner Messing's call to go to games and buy merch. I think there's nothing more exciting than seeing little girls in Sparks jerseys and soccer jerseys. I think that's, as we say, see it to be it is a really important thing. And so as we buy into that and thinking about how sports extend to other opportunities for women. And I think we have some just really miraculous examples on this panel of women who now run major foundations, major organizations, and can trace that back to sports. And so making sure that we're really supportive of that transition and really supportive of making sure girls have that same opportunity. I think the thing that kind of struck me the most from this conversation, as someone who has no athletic skills whatsoever and really found their place on sports teams, collecting equipment and keeping score, but I'm still a member of the team, is that sport really is the art of possibility. And I think just listening across everything that everyone has had to say, with what being a player, an audience member, a booster, part of the business of sport, really brings not just to the individuals involved, but to the community. We are a better Los Angeles when we support sports, but we're a better Los Angeles when we support female sports, when we support girl athletes, when we support women athletes. And with that, I do get they picked the least technologically savvy, so not good at sports and not good at tech. So, just for the perfect person to be with you this evening, but the least technology savvy person to actually explain to you how to watch the film. So we're going to watch LFG, and to do so, we're going to post a link, which will take you to the screening room. It's in the chat. And so a couple of quick instructions, if you're like me and you're not really sure how to do these things, you do want to make sure that you're watching it on Google Chrome. That is how the screening room will open and work for you. And there is a passcode required. It is LFG 2022 LA City. And one of the cool things about us getting to watch it together is that there is a chat function. So sports fans, athletes, those of us who care about this fight can have the opportunity to not just enjoy the film, but to actually get to talk to one another. But I've been told to ask no spoilers, please, although most of us know how this story ends. along the way, this is our opportunity to form community. And I'll also close with saying, and it's really echoing a call out from Commissioner Solis-Montero, there's so many opportunities in Los Angeles to be involved in the work of the city in gender equity. Mayor Garcetti, in his term, really did take gender equity as a central issue, a core issue for his office, but also the entire city. And so every single department engages in a gender equity report. And so everything that the city does, we're actually requiring them to look at that through a gender lens. And all of our external programs, particularly Rec and Park, but all of our external programs have opportunities and things that are special for women and girls, but particularly girls. And so my special call out, since most of the people on this call are adults, and for the kids who are on this call who want to watch the film, is take the time to volunteer, because one of the things we hear consistently from Rec and Park is that while the city can do a really good job, and they have done a really good job of promoting play equity, they really are struggling to find women to serve as coaches, women to serve as referees, and that is equally so important. And my final thing is to sort of bring us back to the issue that is central to this film. So sports, I think, is a really exciting way for us to examine pay equity, and a really public way for us to examine pay equity. But as our Assistant General Manager, Claudia Luna, pointed out, pay equity is a pervasive issue across all of our professions, across every single industry. And so I would just add the call to really be paying attention to that in areas that aren't going to get popular press. They don't have fans, right? But they still have pay inequity. And so we need to be champions in those spaces, as well as champions in stadiums rooting for our players. So with that, I think Mark from the Civil Rights Division has some great instructions about how to get to watch this film. And I would be remiss if I didn't extend a really big thank you again for really just such a wonderful panel and really great thoughts for how we should frame and watch this film.
Thank you. With that, I believe Mark is putting up the instructions on how to watch the film.
And so, as I mentioned, you do want Google Chrome. Otherwise, you won't get to participate in the conversation that's happening around the film. So you do want to watch it on that browser.